He said it so quietly she almost didn't hear it. She was already turning back toward the stove, checking the flame, the way she always checked. The habit of someone who had grown up in a kitchen where gas was expensive and you never left a burner going if you could help it. When his voice came from behind her, low and stripped of everything she had come to associate with it. The authority, the precision, the quality of a man who said only what he meant and meant it to land. This landed differently. No one has ever cooked for me. Imani turned around. He was sitting at the kitchen table of her apartment, which was a sentence that would not have made sense to her 6 weeks ago, not in any universe she could have constructed. Because her kitchen table was a $40 find from the thrift store on Peachtree, and the apartment was 610 square feet, and the building had a freight elevator that worked approximately 2/3 of the time, and he was what he was. Which was a fact that the kitchen table and the freight elevator and the $40 thrift find were all indifferent to, and she had found that indifference, these last 6 weeks, to be one of the more useful things about her apartment. He was looking at the bowl in front of him, not at her. At the bowl. At the egusi soup she had made from the recipe her grandmother had written in a composition notebook 40 years ago in Ibadan. The recipe that Imani had been making since she was 8 years old, and had made tonight without thinking about it, because he had arrived at her door cold and tired from something he hadn't explained, and she had looked at him and done what her grandmother had always done, which was to put something hot on the stove. He was looking at the bowl the way people look at things they don't have words for. "It's just soup," she said. He looked up. His face was doing something she had seen it do 3 times in 6 weeks. The thing it did when the management failed. When the controlled surface of him gave way to whatever was underneath it. It was the most frightening face he had, not because it was dangerous, but because it was not. Because it was simply the face of a man who had just encountered something he had no prepared response to, and had discovered, in the encountering of it, that he had been missing it for a very long time. "It's not," he said. "Just soup." She looked at him at her kitchen table, in her 610 square foot apartment, with the egusi her grandmother had taught her, and the bowl from the set she'd bought 3 for $7 at the dollar store, and she understood that something had shifted in the room that she was not going to be able to shift back. She sat down across from him. "Eat," she said, "before it gets cold." World-build the Vine Street apartments in West Atlanta were not a building. They were an argument, an ongoing, low-volume dispute between what the city said it was becoming and what the people who actually lived in it needed it to be. 6 stories of brick and functional windows, and neighbors who knew each other's names not from a building app, but from the actual proximity of thin walls, and shared laundry days and kids in the courtyard after school. The freight elevator had been broken when Imani moved in, and had been fixed and broken again in the 3 years since, and she had stopped being annoyed by it and started using the stairs, which were reliable and also, she had found, a reasonable place to think through problems that needed the rhythm of movement to resolve. Her apartment was on the 4th floor. It had a kitchen that got afternoon light, and a window in the main room that faced the magnolia tree in the courtyard, which had been there longer than the building and would likely outlast it. She had the kitchen organized the way her grandmother had organized hers, the things used most, closest to hand, the things used least, highest up. Nothing on the counter that didn't earn its place. She was 27. She had been in Atlanta for 4 years, since she graduated from Spelman with a degree in social work that she was using, more or less, in the position she held at the Westside Community Resource Center, where she coordinated services for families navigating housing instability, benefit systems, and the specific exhaustion of being poor in a city that had decided to become expensive without asking the people already in it. The work paid less than it should, and mattered more than most things she could name, and she had made her peace with that equation early and reviewed it periodically to make sure the peace was still holding. She sent money home to her mother in Decatur every month. Not much. There wasn't much to send, but consistent, which her mother had told her once was more valuable than the amount. She had a savings account she added to slowly, deliberately, with the patience of someone who understood that the distance between where she was and where she was going would be covered in small steps, not large ones. She cooked every day. This was not a hobby or a practice or a form of self-care. Though it was all of those things, it was also simply what she did. The way some people ran or read or prayed, she cooked. She had been cooking since she was 8 years old in her grandmother's kitchen in Decatur, standing on a step stool to reach the stove, learning that food was not only what kept a body alive, but what told a person they were worth keeping alive. Her grandmother had cooked for everyone who came through that house, not as performance, not as service, but as the specific language of her love, the one she spoke most fluently. Imani had inherited the language. Kwan Soo Young had come into the resource center on a Wednesday, not as a client, in a capacity she had not fully understood until later, in the capacity of a man whose organization had an interest in a property adjacent to the center's building, and who had sent 2 people ahead of him and arrived himself because the 2 people had returned with information suggesting that whoever ran the coordination services in that building was operating with a level of community intelligence that his people could not replicate, and that he had found, over the course of building what he had built, to be worth understanding directly. He had sat across from her desk in the consultation room, where she usually sat across from families trying to find housing and benefits and the next step, and she had looked at him and understood several things simultaneously. That he was not a client, that he was not a city official, that whatever he was used to rooms rearranging around him, and that this room was not going to do that because this room had a specific function and she was its function, not him. She had asked him what he needed. He had not expected to be asked. She could see that. He had expected to be received, deferred to, maneuvered around, made comfortable. She had asked him what he needed, because it was the question she asked everyone who sat in that chair, and she saw no reason to change the question for him. He had told her, in more detail than he had intended to. She had later recognized this as the specific effect of being asked the right question by someone with no interest in the answer, except its truth. She had told him what she knew about the adjacent property and the community it was embedded in, and what would and would not work in that context, and why. She had given him the full picture without softening it or shaping it toward what she thought he wanted to hear. He had listened the way she would come to know he listened, completely, with the weight of his full attention, without interrupting. When she was done, he had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "You're not afraid of me." She had looked at him. "Should I be?" A pause. "Most people are. I work with families who are terrified of the housing court, the benefits office, and the school system," she said. "I don't have a lot of fear left over for people who sit across desks." He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had come back on Friday. The time bomb was ticking in the magnolia tree, in the afternoon light in the kitchen, in the composition notebook with her grandmother's handwriting, in the specific and unguarded ordinariness of Imani's apartment, which had no architecture designed to impress, no surfaces selected to reflect power back at the people inside it, no performance of anything at all. It was simply a place where someone lived. He had not been in a place like that in a very long time. CTA Bridge My Warm Hearts and Kitchen Light People, 60 seconds before we go any further. If this story found you tonight, and you already know the feeling of cooking for someone who needed it without knowing they needed it, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a like. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see where you are: Lagos, Atlanta, Seoul, Nairobi, London, Birmingham, Accra, wherever your kitchen light is on tonight. Every comment tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to travel. A man who has never been cooked for just tasted something he doesn't have a word for, and the woman who made it is about to find out what that means. Let's go. The heroine's wound she had not meant to feed him the first time. He had come to the center on a Friday afternoon when she was the only one left in the building. Everyone else had gone at 5, and she was finishing case notes that had accumulated over a week of back-to-back family meetings, the kind of notes that required quiet and uninterrupted time and always ended up being written at 6:30 on a Friday. He had knocked on the open door of her office with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to knocking and had decided to do it anyway. She had looked up. "I brought something," he said. And he had held up a bag from the Korean restaurant 3 blocks down. The good one. The one that had been on West Side for 40 years and had stayed when everything around it changed. And she had looked at the bag and then at him and she had said, "Why?" "You were here when I came at 3, he said. "You're still here now." She had looked at him for a moment. "I always eat dinner at my desk on Fridays," she said. "I'm fine. This is better than desk dinner," he said. She had let him put the containers on her desk, and they had eaten in her office among the family files and the benefits forms and the corkboard of resource contacts, and it had been, she would think about it later, one of the stranger and more ordinary things that had happened to her in Atlanta. They had talked, not about the property, not about his organization, but about the neighborhood, about what it had been and what it was trying to become, and what that process cost the people who lived inside it. He knew things she hadn't expected him to know. She said things she hadn't expected to say. When the food was gone, she had gathered the containers, and he had said, "Same time next Friday?" She had said, "You don't have to feed me." He had said, "I know." She had said, "Okay." That was the beginning. She had not named what it was the beginning of. She had noted it, filed it in the part of herself that tracked things, and continued being who she was. She was, in the language of her grandmother, a girl who knew her own kitchen. This was not a small thing in the vocabulary her grandmother used. It meant she knew her own mind, her own resources, her own capacity. It meant she had not been waiting for someone to come along and show her what she was worth. She had already taken that measurement. She had learned this quality, the self-containedness of it, the specific absence of need for external confirmation, from watching her mother rebuild after her father left, which had happened when Imani was 11, and had restructured everything, not destroyed. Her mother had been explicit and deliberate about the difference between restructured and destroyed. He left, her mother had said, with the flat clarity of someone who had already done the processing before the conversation. We didn't. Her mother had worked 2 jobs for 3 years and had gone back to school at night and had, by the time Imani was 15, built something new that was different from what had been there before, and not smaller than it. Imani had watched this and had understood, at 15, in the marrow of her understanding, you build from what you have. You don't wait for what you don't have. You don't let the absence of a thing define the shape of your life. She had built accordingly. The wound was not, therefore, a story of devastation. It was a story of what careful, deliberate self-sufficiency costs over time. The relationships she had kept at a manageable distance because she had been, all her life, the capable one. The person who handled things, the person who cooked for other people and organized other people's resources and sat with other people in their worst moments and held the space without ever, quite, taking up space herself. She had not named this as a wound until Kwan Soo Young sat at her kitchen table and said 4 words that located, with the precision of someone who had been paying the specific quality of attention that she paid to other people. Exactly the thing she had not said to herself. No one had ever cooked for her either. She had not known that was something she was missing. The hero's wound, he had come back on the 2nd Friday, and the 3rd, and the 4th. He did not always bring food from the Korean restaurant. On the 3rd Friday, he brought nothing, because he had arrived unplanned, on the way from somewhere else, and had simply appeared at the open door of her office at 6:15. She had looked up and said, "There's extra jollof on the stove." He had looked at her for a moment and then said, "I don't want to impose." And she had said, "You're not imposing. I made extra." And he had said, "How did you know to make extra?" And she had said, "I always make extra. Sit down." He had sat down. She had given him the jollof in the container she usually packed for her lunch the next day, and he had eaten it at her desk. And something had happened in his face that she had noted and not commented on. She had found out, over the Fridays, who he was. Not all at once, not in the way of a reveal, but in the way of an accumulation. The accumulation of small, unguarded things that a person lets fall when they are in a room that has no performance requirement. He was 41. He had been running the Kwan organization since he was 30, which he had inherited in the specific way these things were inherited, not chosen exactly, but not refused either. The position arriving at the intersection of lineage and capability, and the absence of anyone better suited. He ran it with a philosophy that everyone who worked for him could describe, and none of them fully understood. He was not cruel, but he was not warm. He was not arbitrary, but he was not predictable. He made decisions the way architects made decisions, for the long term, with the structural integrity of the whole in mind. Without sentimentality about individual elements, he had built a life that was almost entirely public. Not in the sense of visible, he was intensely private in the ways that mattered to his security, but public in the sense that everything in it was structural. The organization, the meetings, the decisions, the relationships, everything in a role, everything in a function, everything operating at the level of the system, not the level of the person. He lived in a tower in Midtown. 41st floor. The kitchen was large and equipped with appliances that had cost more than Amani's car and were used approximately never, because his meals were catered when they were in the building, or handled by restaurants when they were not, or simply skipped, which was more often than not. He had staff for the building's management. He had staff for his schedule. He had Chul Se, who had been with him for 17 years and who managed the connective tissue between his private and professional lives with a discretion and competence that had long since transcended employment and arrived somewhere else that neither of them had named. What he did not have, what the 41st floor with the catered meals and the professional kitchen that nobody cooked in did not have, was the thing that her apartment had. He had not known this until the 3rd Friday, when he ate jollof rice at her desk in a community resource center at 6:30 in the evening, made from extra she had cooked without planning it, and given without calculating what it cost. He had not known it until the Tuesday she called him, because a family she was working with had a situation that intersected with something in his district. And she had described the family without identifying them and asked him directly if there was anything he could do, and he had said yes without asking why she was asking. And she had said thank you, and he had stayed on the phone for a moment after the thank you as if there was something else to say that he had not yet located. He had not known it, fully, until the night he showed up at her door cold and tired from something he hadn't explained, and she had looked at him the way she looked at the families who came into the resource center. without judgment, without performance, with the simple attending quality of someone who had decided you were worth her full attention and had turned to the stove. His wound was this: he had been cared for efficiently his entire life, by staff, by the organization, by the systems he had built, and the people who ran them. He had been managed and maintained and kept functional. He had not been, not once, in 41 years of life, in the specific way that could be named, tended to. He had not known the difference until he tasted it. Forced proximity, wrung one she did not make it a thing. This was, she would understand later, the quality of her that had undone him most completely. Not the soup itself, not the extra jollof, not the fact of the cooking, but the fact that she did not make it mean more than it was. She cooked because she cooked. She fed people because that was what her grandmother had done, and what her mother did, and what she did. She did not deploy it. She did not use it as currency. He was unused to things that were not currency. He came back the following week, and she made groundnut soup because she had the ingredients, and it was the right weather for it, and she told him that when he sat down. It's groundnut soup. The weather called for it, and he had looked at the bowl in the same way he had looked at the egusi, that particular looking, the looking that was not about the food, and she had said, "You keep looking at it like that." "Like what?" he said. "Like it means something." He picked up the spoon. "Doesn't it?" he said. She looked at him across her kitchen table. "It's food," she said. "Eat it while it's hot." He ate. She ate across from him, and they talked, the way they had talked since the beginning, in the comfortable, unperformed way of two people who had each independently developed the ability to say what they actually thought. He asked about the family she had mentioned on the phone. She told him. He asked a follow-up question that surprised her in its specificity. She answered it. He told her something about the district, not organizational information, just neighborhood information, the kind he had accumulated from being in it for a long time, that she could use. They were, she thought, watching him eat the groundnut soup with the focused and unself-conscious attention of a man tasting something for the first time, in the process of becoming something she did not know yet what. "My mother didn't cook," he said. Not an announcement, not a disclosure, just a thing that came out, the way things came out in her kitchen that apparently did not come out in other places. She had staff. We had a full household. There was a woman named Mrs. O who prepared everything. He was still looking at the soup. It was excellent food. Mrs. O was very skilled. He paused. It tasted like being managed. Imani turned her spoon in her bowl. "This doesn't taste like that." "No," he said. "It doesn't. What does it taste like?" He thought about it in a way that told her he was taking the question seriously, not deflecting it. "Like someone decided," he said, "that I was worth the trouble." She looked at him. He looked at the soup. "I'm going to show you something," she said. She stood up and went to the shelf above the counter and came back with a composition notebook, spiral-bound, the cover worn soft with handling, and set it on the table between them. "My grandmother's recipes." She wrote them all down. She opened it. The handwriting inside was small and neat and slightly faded, in English and Yoruba both, with annotations in the margins in a different pen that were her grandmother's later additions. She learned to cook from her mother, who learned from hers. Every dish in here goes back. She turned a page. "When I make something from this book, there are women in it who died before I was born." He looked at the notebook. He looked at it the way he had looked at the soup. "That's what it tastes like," she said. "That's what I'm giving you when I cook. It's not nothing." "No," he said. His voice had the quiet quality that she was coming to recognize. the layer underneath the operational layer, the one that only emerged in her kitchen. It's not nothing. Rung 2, he started coming on Wednesdays too. Not planned, not scheduled. He would appear, sometimes with something from the restaurant, sometimes with groceries he had purchased, with a slightly bewildered air of a man who had entered a grocery store under his own power for possibly the first time, and found it surprisingly navigable. He brought things she had mentioned in passing, the specific pepper she'd said was hard to find, the brand of palm oil she preferred. He had remembered. She did not comment on the remembering. She used the ingredients. She let him sit in the kitchen while she cooked. This was not a small thing, though she did not frame it as significant. Her kitchen while she cooked was not a performance space. It was where she thought, where she processed the week's accumulation of other people's difficult circumstances, where she moved through her grandmother's recipes with the ease of something practiced into the body. She did not usually have an audience. He was not, she found, an audience. He was a presence. There was a difference. An audience watched. He simply was there, occupying the chair at the table with the same quality he occupied every space, fully, without apology, without performing the occupation. He asked questions while she cooked, not intrusive questions, specific ones. What does that do? Why that order? How do you know when it's ready? She answered. She found that answering while cooking was easy. Her hands knew the work, and her mouth was available. You do it without looking, he said one Wednesday, watching her adjust the flame without glancing down. Like it's already in your hands. It is, she said. My grandmother put it there. He was quiet. Did she teach you? He said. Or did you watch? Both, she said. She taught me by letting me watch, and then by letting me try, and then by standing beside me while I did it wrong, and then by letting me do it again. She turned the stir. She never took it away from me when I got it wrong. She just showed me the correct thing and let me keep going. He said nothing for a moment. That's a specific kind of trust, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She plated the food. She set the bowl in front of him. He looked at it, in the way he always looked at what she put in front of him, with the full weight of his attention, like he was trying to memorize something. What? She said. I was thinking, he said, that I've eaten in the best restaurants in 6 countries. I've had food prepared by people who trained for decades. He picked up the spoon. This is the best thing I've ever been fed. Quan, I'm not flattering you, he said. I don't flatter people. It's inefficient, and I'm not good at it. He looked at the bowl. I'm telling you a fact. She sat down across from him. Why, she said. He looked at her. Why is it the best thing, she said. Tell me what you think makes the difference. He considered. She watched him consider, with the deliberateness of a man who had learned to say only what he meant. Because you didn't make it for a client, he said, or for a meeting, or for a function, or because it was your job, or to demonstrate something. You made it because, he paused. Why do you make it? Because someone was in my kitchen and hungry, she said. And I had food. That's the difference, he said. That's the entire difference. Rung 3. The competence reveal the situation arrived on a Thursday, which was not a Wednesday or a Friday, which meant she was at her desk at the resource center when Chulse called. She had Chulse's number because Quan had given it to her the second week, saying, if you ever need something navigated and you can't reach me, call Chulse. She had saved it with the label Quan, emergency contact, and had not used it. She used it now because the situation was not, technically, an emergency, but it was a situation that had been moving slowly toward emergency for 2 weeks and had arrived that morning in the form of a letter. She described it to Chulse. a family at the center, housing case. A property dispute that had been escalating through channels that should have resolved it 3 months ago, and hadn't. Because the property management company had a relationship with someone who had a relationship with someone. And the chain of relationships had been quietly obstructing the correct resolution. She did not need intervention. She had almost never needed intervention. She was good at her job, and her job gave her the tools for most things. But she had a name, which she had arrived at by the specific method she used to arrive at names, which was patience and attention, and following the chain of relationships backward until it reached its source. And she wanted to know if the name connected to anything in Kwan's district. Chul-se listened without interrupting. "I'll have an answer in 2 hours," he said. She said, "Thank you." The answer came in 90 minutes. Chul-se called back and confirmed the name and its connections, and then mentioned, in the precise and informative way of a man who had been doing this for 17 years, that Kwan would also want to be aware of a second connection the name had that was not related to her case but was relevant to the district. She said, "I'll tell him." Chul-se paused. "You can tell me," he said. "I'll pass it." "I'll tell him," she said. Evenly, not unkindly. Another pause, a different kind. "Of course," Chul-se said. She told Kwan at her kitchen table that Wednesday. She put the information in front of him, the way she put food in front of him, fully, without softening it, without shaping it toward what she thought he wanted to hear. The name, the connections, what it meant for her family's case, and what it meant for the district, and what she thought the correct next move was. He listened with the weight of his full attention. When she was done, he said, "How did you get to the name?" "Patience," she said. "And following the relationships backward, how long?" 2 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. "Chul-se said you told him you'd tell me directly," he said. "Yes, why?" She looked at him. "Because you should hear things from people who know what they're saying," she said, "not pass through." A pause. "And because I know what I'm saying." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "You do." The family's case resolved in 6 days. She did not ask how. She noted the resolution, updated the case file, and moved to the next family. He brought groceries on Friday, more than usual. The specific pepper, the palm oil, and 3 things she had not mentioned, but which were in the grandmother's notebook in the recipe she had been planning to make next. She looked at the groceries, then at him. "You looked at the notebook. You left it on the table," he said, not defensive, factual, "and you memorized the next recipe." "I remembered the ingredients," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. "There is," she said. "Sit down." The external threat, it came, as these things came in his world, without announcement. She found out because he didn't come on Wednesday, which had not happened in 11 weeks, and then didn't come on Friday, and when she called the number he answered on the 5th ring with the quality of voice that she had learned to read, the compressed operational register, the one that meant something was consuming all available capacity. "I can't," he began. "I know," she said. "Are you all right?" A pause. "Define all right. Are you physically okay?" "Yes, okay," she said. "Then handle what you need to handle. Call me when it's done." He called on Sunday at 9 p.m. "It's handled," he said. "Good," she said. "Have you eaten?" A pause. "No, come over," she said. "Imani, it's 9 at night, I know what time it is," she said. "Come over." He came over. She made pepper soup because pepper soup was what her grandmother made when someone needed it, when the body had been through something and needed something that went into the bones and stayed there. She made it from the recipe in the notebook, the one her grandmother had annotated twice, once in the 80s and once in the 90s, each annotation a refinement, the recipe getting truer to itself across decades. He sat at her kitchen table and she put the bowl in front of him, and he looked at it with the looking that she had catalogued and understood and stopped being surprised by. She sat across from him. "What happened?" she said. He told her. Not everything. There were things that were not hers to know, and he understood the difference, and she respected it. But enough. The shape of it, the thing that had required 4 days of his complete attention, and had resolved in a way that was correct, but had cost something she could see in the set of his shoulders and the quality of his tiredness. She listened the way she listened, fully, without filling the space with her reactions, letting him say what needed to be said at the pace at which it needed to be said. When he was done, the soup was half finished. "The district," she said. "The secondary connection from the name I gave you. Is that related to this?" He looked at her. "Yes. Then it's not just handled," she said. "It's protected." She held his gaze. "What I gave you mattered." "Yes," he said, "it did." "I want you to know that I know that," she said. "I'm not telling you to make it transactional. I'm telling you because I want you to know what you have in me." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. "You have someone who pays attention, who brings you what she finds, who is not going to perform things for you or manage things for you, but who is going to be honest with you about what she sees." She paused. "That's what I can give you." He looked at her across her kitchen table, the pepper soup, the grandmother's notebook on the shelf, the $40 thrift find holding the weight of everything that had happened at it. "Imani," he said. His voice had the layer underneath the layer. "What do you want?" She looked at him. "I want you to finish the soup," she said. "And then I want to tell you something." He finished the soup. "I don't need anything from you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am fine. I have always been fine. I will continue to be fine." She held his gaze. "But I have been cooking for you for 11 weeks, and somewhere in those 11 weeks I have started to want you to be here. Not for what you can navigate. Not for the groceries." She was steady. "For the sitting at the table." A pause. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know, and because I don't perform things." He was very still. "I'm aware," he said. His voice was the quiet voice, the layer underneath voice. "That you don't perform things." He looked at the empty bowl. "It's the thing about you that I have the least defense against." "I know," she said. "You know," he said. "Quietly, you're not difficult to read," she said. "When you're in this kitchen." She tilted her head. "You're very different here." "Yes," he said. "I am." He looked at his hands. "I don't know what to do with what I am here." He looked up. "I have spent my entire adult life knowing exactly what to do, in every room I walk into, with every person I encounter." The quiet deepened. "I don't know what to do in your kitchen. I have never known what to do here. And I keep coming back." "I know," she said. "I let you." The declaration he arrived the following Wednesday with his arms full. She opened the door and looked at what he was holding. 2 bags of groceries. The composition notebook she had not noticed was missing from her kitchen shelf, and an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the operational face. Not the layer underneath face. Something new. The face of a man who has made a decision by working through the complete architecture of it and has arrived at the other side and is standing at a door. "You took my grandmother's notebook," she said. "I borrowed it," he said. "I returned it." She looked at the notebook, then at the groceries, then at him. "What's in the bags?" "The ingredients," he said, "for the ayamase. The recipe on page 43. He held her gaze. You said once that you only make it for people who matter. She had said that. On the third Wednesday, when he had asked what was the most difficult recipe in the notebook, she had told him the ayamase, the ofada stew, the one that took 3 hours and could not be rushed, and required a quality of attention that meant she only made it when it was worth the attention. She had said she only made it for people who mattered. You want me to make the ayamase, she said. I want to learn to make it, he said. With you. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man in the doorway of her 610-square-foot apartment with his 41st-floor midtown tower and his 17-year chief of staff and his organization and his specific and documented terribleness, holding her grandmother's recipe notebook and 2 bags of ingredients and the expression of someone who had stopped managing what his face was doing. You want to learn to cook, she said. I want to learn to cook, he said. For you. The sentence sat between them. Not for people. Not for occasions. For you. She understood, because she understood language and its uses and what people meant by what they said when they were not performing, that he was telling her he intended to feed her. That he had looked at 11 weeks of her feeding him and had arrived, by the route of his specific and deliberate kind of thinking, at the understanding that he wanted to close the distance between receiving and giving. That he wanted to stand at her stove with the grandmother's notebook and do the hard and imprecise and unmanageable thing of learning to make something that required 3 hours and could not be rushed. That he wanted to cook for her. She stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. We start with the peppers. The choice the ayamase took 4 hours. This was partly because the recipe required it, and partly because he was a person who had not stood at a stove in his adult life, and learning required the time that learning required, and she was not going to rush it. She stood beside him, and she showed him, and she let him try, and she corrected the thing that needed correcting, and let him do it again. He was, she found, an excellent student. Not because he was talented with his hands, though he was more coordinated than she expected, but because he gave it the quality of attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. He was all the way in. He read the recipe with the focused care of a man reading a document that had consequences. He asked questions that were specific and showed he was tracking the logic of the process, not just the steps. At the 2-hour mark, she told him to stir, and she sat down at the kitchen table and watched him stir and thought about 11 weeks and the weight of the empty bowl. And no one has ever cooked for me, said quietly to the table in the way of something that had been held for a very long time. Finally being set down. Can I tell you something? She said. He turned his head, the wooden spoon in his hand, her grandmother's stove. When you said that, she said, that night, what you said when you looked at the egusi. She watched his face. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say, but I've been thinking about it since. He waited. No one has cooked for me either, she said. Not the way I mean it. I cook for everyone. I have cooked for everyone my entire life. It's what I do, what I am. She looked at the table. I didn't know that I was waiting for someone to do it back. She looked up. I didn't know it was something I needed until you asked to learn. He was still. I'm not telling you to make it a debt, she said. I'm telling you because you told me something that was true, and now I'm telling you something true back. She held his gaze. That's what we do. He turned fully from the stove. Stir, she said. You can't stop stirring. He turned back and stirred. His shoulders did something. A release. The kind she had seen in the families she worked with when something had been said that the body had been waiting to hear. The people who matter, he said. The ayamase. You said you only make it for people who matter. Yes, you told me what you only do for people who matter, he said. 11 weeks ago, before we were, he searched for the word. Whatever we are, she said. Whatever we are, he agreed. You told me before that. Why she thought about it. Because it was true then, she said. And I don't say things that aren't true. He stirred the pot. I want to be someone, he said, who cooks for you. He said it the way he said things that he meant completely, precisely, without elaboration, trusting the sentence to carry its own weight. Not a skill, not a gesture. Someone who knows your kitchen, the way you know it. He paused. The way your grandmother knew it. Imani looked at him at her stove, at the composition notebook open on the counter, at the wooden spoon he was holding with the careful attention of a student, at the face he had stopped managing weeks ago in this room, the face that was simply what it was when the performance requirement was lifted. That's going to take time, she said. I know, he said. The ayamase alone, she said, takes practice. I understand, he said. I have time. He looked at her over his shoulder, briefly. The look that was the layer underneath look but no longer needed to be kept beneath anything. If you have time. She got up from the table. She stood beside him at the stove, and she took the spoon from his hand, and she corrected the stir, and gave it back and stood there beside him, while he did it again. I have time, she said. Resolution he learned the ayamase over 3 Wednesdays. The first attempt was good. The second was better. The third he made with her sitting at the table with the grandmother's notebook open, but unneeded. And when he set the bowl in front of her, she looked at it the way he had looked at her bowls, with the full weight of attention, with the recognition of what was being given, and she picked up the spoon, and she ate. He sat across from her. He watched her eat with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Not anxious, not performing the watching, simply present, wanting to know. Well, she said. Tell me honestly, he said. Don't soften it. I never soften things, she said. You know that. I know, he said. Tell me. She turned the spoon in the bowl. The pepper balance is yours, she said. Different from my grandmother's. It's more. She ate another spoon. She would argue with you about it. Would she be right? Imani considered. No, she said. Yours is actually better. He was quiet. She would still argue, Imani said. She argued about everything. She was 83 years old and she argued about everything, and she was usually correct. She set the spoon down. You would have liked her. I think, he said, I would have been afraid of her. You would have been right to be, Imani said. She could read a person in 40 seconds, and she did not soften what she found. Like you, he said. Where do you think I learned it? He looked at the notebook on the shelf. The composition spiral, the worn cover, the small neat handwriting inside that went back decades and contained, among other things, the recipe he had just cooked from memory. I want to meet your mother, he said. Imani looked at him. Not as. He stopped. Started more carefully. Not as anything formal. Not in any capacity that requires a presentation or an occasion. He held her gaze with the steadiness he had learned in her kitchen to stop hiding. I want to meet her because she raised you, and because I would like her to know. He paused, chose that someone is taking care of you. She looked at him for a long moment. You're taking care of me, she said. That's what you want to tell her. Yes, he said, in the way that you've been taking care of me. He looked at the bowl between them, in the specific and daily way, the way that lives in the hands. She thought about her mother, about 3 years of 2 jobs and night school and the rebuilding. about what her mother had told her at 15. You build from what you have. She had what she had. The kitchen, the notebook, the grandmother's handwriting, the wooden spoon. The man across the table who had learned the ayamase over 3 Wednesdays and made it better. Sunday, she said. She makes dinner on Sundays. She'll feed you too much and ask you too many questions. He looked at her. Good, he said. Emotional close, he had whispered it to the bowl. Not to her. He hadn't been able to say it to her directly. Not yet. Not that night. He had said it to the egusi soup in the dollar store bowl on the $40 thrift store table, because that was as close as he could get to saying it out loud, and she had heard it anyway. No one has ever cooked for me. And she had said, it's just soup. And he had said, it's not, and they had both been right, which was the thing about her that had undone him most completely. Not her competence, not her intelligence, not her network of community knowledge or her patience or her grandmother's notebook. The fact that she was right about everything in the ordinary way, without calculation, without performance, just because she had been paying attention to what was actually true. She cooked because people were worth cooking for. She fed people because her grandmother had taught her that food was the language of love, and she had inherited the language and was fluent in it. And she had fed him. Not because he was powerful, not because he was dangerous, not because he came with anything she needed, but because he was in her kitchen and hungry, and she had food. He had spent 41 years building things. Organizations, structures, empires, systems. He was very good at building things. He was extraordinarily good at it. He had not known, until a woman in a 610-square-foot apartment on the 4th floor of a building with an unreliable freight elevator put a bowl in front of him, that none of the things he had built could do the one thing that bowl had done. Tell him he was worth the trouble. She had known it for 11 weeks before he said it out loud. She had known it because she knew how to read people, and she had been reading him and what she had found underneath the organization and the empire and the 41 years of cold, capable, isolated building was simply a man who had never been fed. So she had fed him, and she had kept feeding him, and he had learned to feed her back. That was the whole of it. That was the deal. Not a rescue, not a negotiation, not a power dynamic that needed to be mapped and managed. 2 people, a kitchen, a grandmother's notebook, a wooden spoon, and the specific, revolutionary act of deciding that another person was worth the trouble of the full attention of your hands. Some people find their language late. When they find it, they don't let it go. NCTA, my warm hearts and kitchen-like people, if you felt this one in your chest, you already know what kind of home this channel is. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see our table tonight. Atlanta, Lagos, London, Seoul, Nairobi, Birmingham, wherever you are watching from. Leave a like so the algorithm knows this story deserves to travel. Subscribe and ring that bell, because what's coming next features a woman who walked into a negotiation as the lowest paid person in the room and left having rewritten the terms for everyone in it. I'll see you there. Keep the stove on.